Hello, Top 10 family. You guys have been absolutely loving the Amelia Earhart videos recently. Shout out to James for doing such a good job in keeping you all informed, but there is so much more to learn about the mysterious disappearances of the first female to fly solo over the Atlantic Ocean. And recent discoveries have opened the floodgates on theories as to what really happened on July 2nd of 1937, so let's talk about it. We're gonna start off today with a bit of background in order to shine some light on the uprise of interest in Earhart's disappearance this past month. As with most mysteries, there are generally 3 points in which the public's interest is sparked. First, when the incident takes place. Second, whenever new sufficient evidence comes to light. And third, when the mystery is actually solved. And we're at stage 2, because recently something resembling a sunken aircraft has appeared on sonar imagery captured by a submersible sitting at the bottom of the Pacific Ocean, right about where Amelia is said to have disappeared so many years ago. After examining her flight path and cross-referencing it with her radio communication, in which she had notified channels that she had been running dangerously low on fuel, it has been determined that the likelihood of the image they found on sonar being Amelia's lost plane is in fact highly likely, with scientist Romeo stating that he believes the silhouette clearly outlines the distinct features of the plane's twin vertical stabilizers in the back. The research team working on the discovery are hoping to capture some clearer imagery before putting together a rescue effort to bring the vessel back onto land for further discovery and for it to be placed in a museum. So, if it is in fact Amelia Earhart's plane that has been discovered deep beneath the surface of the ocean, it would confirm that she did in fact crash or safely land in the Pacific Ocean just 160 kilometers west of Howland Island, which is in the jurisdiction of the United States but rests in the North Pacific between Australia and the Hawaiian Islands. So let's you and I take a short walk down both lanes and discuss the possibilities and the likelihoods of either scenario. Option 1A. Earhart crash lands in the Pacific due to fuel shortage, and her navigator Fred Noonan die on vicious impact. Option 1B. The pair crash land into the ocean and begin to sink deep into the Pacific, losing light and air as they descend down towards the seafloor, and they die from either lack of oxygen or drowning. Option 1C. They didn't crash land, but rather purposefully landed as best as you can into the ocean, but the plane begins to sink, and they either die of lack of oxygen or drowning. Option 1D, the pair land safely in the Pacific Ocean and the aircraft manages to stay afloat. The pair are able to exit the cockpit, but die from either drowning or starvation. While these are all quite dark, I figured it would be best to get the most widely accepted theories out of the way before we begin diving into some of the other possibilities. Which brings us to option 2. Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan survived either the crash or emergency landing, which happened much closer to Howland Island than where the plane was found. As it is estimated, it has most likely migrated from its original touchdown point due to ocean currents pulling it away from land upon descension, as well as shifting sands migrating the aircraft after it touched down on the seafloor of its new home. The closer proximity to the island would have made the possibility of both Amelia and Noonan's survival much more likely, as it would have provided them with an out, albeit an incredibly difficult one, but an out in the form of a swim to land. So option 2A, they drown swimming to the island. Option 2B, they make it, but of course eventually die of starvation along with exposure to the elements. But then of course there is the entirely possible option 2C. They make it to the island and they're able to survive off of makeshift rudimentary tools and survival tactics until they either die of old age, younger than they would have if they weren't stranded, but still, or until one, if not 2 of them, are rescued. Next up, we have the suggestion of the possible fact that Amelia survived whatever happened when her plane went down, and instead of coming forward, she assumed a new identity to either hide from an unknown danger, avoid the embarrassment of the crash, or perhaps just to experience the simple life she once knew once again. You see, before Amelia became a famous pilot and politically outspoken women's rights activist, she was a visiting college professor as well as an entrepreneur and a fashion designer. Many believe she used the plane's disappearance as a way to escape the spotlight and return to a life of learning, educating, and creating, all things she had loved long before her fame. Switching gears just a bit, as another theory suggests that they did not crash and were not rescued, but rather just overshot their distance and ended up landing in Nikumaroro Reef next to Gardner Island, a reef which was inhabited by large carnivorous hermit crabs, also known as coconut crabs, which can grow up to 1 meter, 3 feet long, weigh 10 pounds, and can carry 60. They have been thought to be attracted to human flesh and have claw strength 10 times greater than the average human's grip strength. hopefully you can kind of see where I'm going with this. It is said that the impact of the landing on such harsh terrain might have rendered both pilot and navigator unconscious or simply out of sorts, and the large crabs would have viewed them as an easy meal sent down from heaven, a gifted attempt at satisfying their insatiable hunger. Of course, this is definitely one of the more gruesome theories of what happened to the pair, and while it does account for the disappearance of both Amelia and Fred, it does not lend any explanation to the whereabouts of the plane. Well, it might explain it a bit, as another theory, which also suggests this same crash landing, explains the lack of information on the plane's whereabouts, attributing it to high tides sweeping up the aircraft and dragging it out to sea after the safe departure of both pilot and navigator, who were said to have walked along the shallow reef of Nikumaroro to the shores of Gardner Island. They became castaways, living off the land for as long as they could. And while this might seem like just a far-off theory, evidence was found to back this claim. In 1937, months after the pair and the plane's disappearance, photographs taken along the island's shores appeared to show landing gear parts that matched those of Amelia's plane, the Electra. Not only that, but in 1940 a skeleton was found on the island, and decades later the bones were measured and tested to reveal that they belonged to a female, the same height as Amelia, and with the same ethnic origin, which is pretty compelling evidence, especially considering that there hasn't been much other evidence found to date. Next up on the list, we have a theory that suggests Amelia was much more than just a talented pilot with big ambitions and a creative streak. In fact, many people strongly believe that Amelia Earhart and Fred Noonan were actually spies working for the United States government, and that their trip around the world, as well as their alleged crash landing, was orchestrated to create a valid excuse for the United States government to request permission for Navy surveillance planes to canvass the areas over the Japanese islands. It has been speculated that the government had actually instructed Amelia to send out a distress signal when she reached the area in which the government had wished to further explore with extensive military equipment and surveillance gear, and then stage the crash landing so as to not raise any red flags to the Japanese government. You can find this theory illustrated further in the 1943 movie Flight for Freedom, which is said to have been closely based on Amelia and Noonan's 1937 expedition. So, if the spy theory is correct, this next point would make a lot of sense, as another theory suggests that Amelia and Noonan landed not on Howland Island though, or Gardner, but rather the Marshall Islands, where they were taken into Japanese custody, accused of espionage, and then lived out the rest of their lives as prisoners in a Japanese holding facility. While this might sound pretty out there, you should know that this theory is actually widely accepted by historians, scholars, and scientists alike, as it has been supported by photographic evidence, and despite being strongly debated by the Japanese government, who maintained they had no involvement with the pair whatsoever. But let's get into it. More than 80 years after Earhart's disappearance, a photograph was discovered in the National Archives that pictures an assumed Amelia sitting on the right side of a dock in Japan, with Noonan standing next to her on the left. In the background of the photograph, you can clearly make out a large ship towing a barge, which appears to be carrying the Electra aircraft that was said to have disappeared along with its crew. If this is still sounding like some kind of conspiracy theory to you, you should know these photographs were confirmed by former Executive Assistant Director of the FBI, Sean Henry, who is confident the photos are legitimate and picture both Amelia and Noonan along with their aircraft. So, with the FBI's stamp of approval on the theory that the pair were taken prisoner in Japan, we have to wonder just what the Japanese government would have done with the two. It has been suggested that while Noonan was forced to live out his days in a jail cell, Amelia was given another option, and that was to become part of Tokyo Rose, an organization that used English-speaking women to spread Japanese propaganda over the radio to American troops in the Pacific during World War II. If this is the case, Amelia would have been forced to live out her final days, heard and unseen by the very men who would have been sent to the front lines to rescue her, had they been at all aware of what had become of the famous pilot. And finally, we have just one more case of Amelia assuming a brand new identity, this time in order to escape Japan without having to go back to her life of espionage in the United States. This theory states that after World War II, Amelia was released from Japanese custody after they used her identity as a bargaining chip, which allowed the Japanese emperor to remain in power and awarded Amelia her freedom. Amelia then is said to have moved to New Jersey, where she settled into life as Irene, a retired pilot turned American banker. A book was later published about this theory, and while it was widely accepted by critics, Irene Bolam herself viciously denied the claim and filed a lawsuit which later resulted in the book being withdrawn from public circulation. It seems as though this theory is either way off or a highly protected secret, as many believe the similarities between Amelia and Irene are just too canny for it not to be true. Thank you guys so much for watching today's video. There's so many crazy theories out there as to what happens. Who really knows? If you think you do, please leave a comment. I always enjoy reading them. I've been your host, Hannah Thompson, and I'll see you in the next video.